Hi, I am Melissa Cameron, and welcome to the State of Philanthropy in Dallas, the October Junior League of Dallas Sustainer Program. I am a Junior League Sustainer Advisory Board member, and part of SunWest Communications Corporate Social Responsibility and Philanthropic Services team. You may be asking yourself, who is SunWest Communications? Well, we are a communications, marketing, and public relations firm, and we are very proud to sponsor today's panel discussion. And in fact, we are broadcasting live from our brand spanking new podcast studio here in our offices at LBJ and the Tollway. I want to thank my teammate who you've heard, Hannah Loera, for all of her backstage work on producing this broadcast today. A little bit of housekeeping. This is a Zoom webinar, which means that you're only going to see the face of the panelists today. Our audience members are not on camera, and you all are muted, but you are more than welcome to chat and say hello to your fellow sustainers and members in the chat box. And if you have a question, please use the Q&A box. We're going to be monitoring that, and this program is also being recorded. So if there's time available afterwards to be able to answer those questions, we're going to try and leave some time to do those. We have a lot to unpack today, and we really want to hear directly from our speakers who are our frontline folks in the community. So I'm hoping we can get to your questions. Now, if I can ask all of our panelists to unhide themselves, I want to jump right in with introductions. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on introductions and give you the full bios. My goodness, we would be here for the entire hour. We have such an incredible lineup for you today. But if you are interested in learning more about them, I think Hannah's going to provide a link to their full bios online. So if you'd like to learn a little bit about them or their organizations, please feel free to click on that. All right, first and foremost, let me start with introducing Tricia Cunningham. Tricia is the president and CEO of the North Texas Food Bank, a $200 million nonprofit that is leading the fight against hunger in North Texas. Next is Jan Langbein, no stranger to the JLD. Tricia is president and CEO of the Genesis Women's Shelter and Support, and Jan has been a fearless activist to end violence against women for nearly, I can't believe it, Jan, 30 years.
Yeah, I know, right?
And in fact, I was a provisional and heard you speak, and you were so inspiring to me to get involved in the community. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Next up is Monica Eggert-Smith. Monica is Community Foundation's Chief Relationship Officer, overseeing the team that manages all donor relationships at CFT. And it is amazing how CFT has grown to more than $1 billion under advisement and awards more than 5,000 grants a year, impacting a variety of community issues. So thank you, Monica, for being here. And I'm so excited that Terry could join us. Terry Loftus is the president and executive director of the Community Arts Alliance, otherwise known to us as TACA, which supports excellence in the arts in North Texas through grant making, capacity building, and thought leadership. And right now, Terry has got his finger on the pulse of keeping our arts community alive during these times. So thank you to each of you for lending your voice and your insights to the Junior League of Dallas's Sustainers. There's a lot of folks on today that are on boards, are donors themselves and volunteers and very active in the community. So I know that they're going to want to hear from you directly how you are being impacted. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to have kind of a round robin style of questions addressed to each of you. And if you've just joined us, please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. And if we have time remaining in our program, we're going to invite our panelists to answer them. We're also going to close out our program with a few words from my dear friend and this year's Sustainer President, Nancy Gopez. All right, my friends, without further ado, we have all heard it said during this pandemic and focus on racial inequality that we're all in the same boat. And we know that's not true. Not everyone has access to a boat. Not everyone has paddles, and some boats have holes in them. So how have you and your organizations evolved your program delivery through these times? And I'm going to start with Tricia first.
Well, Melissa, thank you. First of all,
what an honor to be on this panel. You know, so many wonderful people, and Junior League of Dallas certainly has a warm spot in my heart. I got the opportunity to sit on the community advisory board for a few years, and so really got to understand a lot more about the work and just a wonderful impact in the community. So thank you for the opportunity here. Also, just wanted to talk a little bit more about what we do at the food bank, because I think what is more interesting is what didn't change during the pandemic in our business model versus what did change. But, you know, we relied on about 40,000 volunteers a year prior to the pandemic in order to be able to serve the number of people that were in our community. But whenever middle of March came, we had literally corporate representatives standing out by our front door telling their employees to go home because they were not allowing them to come in and be able to volunteer. So we had to shift very quickly at a time whenever we had to increase the number of people that were working on our production line. So we had to go to a safe method of distribution. So instead of sending pallets of food out to our partner agencies for them to have a client sort of grocery store shopping experience for those people that needed food in their pantries, we had to start kitting boxes to make it easier and safer to be able to get the food on the tables that those that need it. I know a lot of you have seen a lot of the long lines that happened at Fair Park. I mean, really miles and miles long, people lining up at 1:45 in the morning to be able to get access to a $20, $25 box of food. You know, and people don't do that unless they need it. And I think that's what has been so humbling, is the fact that we are providing hope in a box, at a $20 box of food for many people who have not needed it ever before, that they now find themselves in a situation economically overnight where they needed to figure out how are they going to make ends meet. And so we had to shift to a model. Thanks to Monica and the Communities Foundation, we were able to support unemployed hospitality industry workers to be able to come and volunteer on our production floor. And so this was an initiative called Get Shift Done, where donors had contributed to that fund that not only for the North Texas Food Bank, we were the initial pilot, but it also expanded to other nonprofits in our community who could leverage these workers, and it was a win-win. They were able to get paid, and we were able to benefit from their services at a time when we needed it most. We leveraged on every government resource that we could, including the National Guard for a period of time, just because the needs were just enormous. And we've doubled our output in a matter of weeks. We really sort of flipped the switch, and our team said we can do it. And so we did it because we knew the needs were out there in the community overall.
That's great. Thank you, Tricia. Hope in a box, such a profound phrase, and gut-wrenching to think how many people really need the services. Jan, I'm going to take it to you, and I've heard you say both at the luncheon and elsewhere that right now the amount of people suffering from domestic violence is just absolutely profound. Can you extrapolate on how you're able to actually deliver programming in this time of COVID?
Right. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me today. I was telling somebody I'm a little intimidated by my surroundings. This panel is pretty impressive. So I appreciate being part of it. No, for us, it's different. The closing our doors is not an option, because during this time of the pandemic, not only is domestic violence going on, but now she is quarantined with her abuser. She can't call out for help because he's in the next room. And we've even heard stories of him using COVID as a choice of weapon. We find that abusers are never at a loss for coming up with something new to hurt somebody else with. But with regards to COVID, we've heard, you know, he makes me wash my hands until they bleed, or he coughs in my face when he's mad at me and I don't get dinner on time. And so unfortunately, we couldn't ramp up our services because we're landlocked at the shelter, and we were not turning people away. Even when we would have a case, we had a couple of women who were considered first responders, and they would go off to work. Some of them came home with COVID. Well, that's not something I can turn somebody out with, right? What?
Sorry, Creighton forgot to pay the electric bill, so my lights went off for a second.
Come on, Creighton.
I
I thought you were dancing to that.
no, not to that at all, Jan.
Yeah, No, I mean, the fact that we literally have to stay open, our 24-hour hotline has to stay open. We do feel real strongly that although we've seen an uptick in requests for services, when the all clear bell sounds, I think it's going to be a tsunami. When women can call out for help, when kids are back in school, school being one of the #1 reporters of child abuse, we couldn't close the shelter, but that also meant working with a skeleton crew. We sent home as many people as we could working remotely. We flip-flopped shifts so we could spread out. We bought new furniture that can be wiped down easily. We did all kinds of precautions with, of course, face masks on everybody all the time, but coming and going, all staff, all clients, we took temperatures. But again, if you had it, I can't turn you away. So we had quarantine apartments and bedrooms that we ended up taking meals to them, putting it outside the room. I mean, and thank you, Food Bank. Those are some of our meals, that Hope in a Box that you're talking about. So I love the partnerships between these organizations that are here today. But anyway, new procedures. Now our non-residential, which is our biggest footprint, we probably had before COVID 50 group support groups a week, 50 a week. And then not to mention individual counseling, 22 therapists working all the time, 9 in the morning till 9 at night. Well, we had to stop that because they couldn't come in for group. Even with a mask, there wasn't enough social distancing. And so we turned to HIPAA compliant Zoom and telehealth platforms that we could still stay connected if possible. But imagine again, how can you jump on your group support if he's in the next room? So you try to do it from the parking lot of the grocery store. Even though we didn't have any extra room at the shelter, we were taking calls from the police and just finding a place for those who the police have designated as high lethality. So it's been a real pivot for us. In addition to, you know, we rely on community support, and we'll get into how we're funded, but we had to pivot this big international conference on crimes against women. Right. We were 6 weeks out trying to decide, now, do we do it virtually? Or from what I was hearing in March on the TV, it was going to be gone by spring and there'd only be 15 people who would be affected by it. And I'm not going to get into everybody please go vote, but everybody please go vote. And so we had to decide, do we wait to make the decision? Do we not wait? Do we make? And finally, we pivoted on a dime to a virtual platform for that conference on crimes against women. So we can talk about more with the fund development down the line, but everything is upside down for Genesis, but we knew for sure we could not stop providing services and won't. We just won't.
No, and such a high touch type of a delivery of service. It's painful to think you had to go sort of in the opposite direction. Thank you, Jan. And Monica, I want to talk to you next and ask you about program delivery. And people don't really think about a CFT sometimes as being the hub of information that you are for many nonprofits, thought leaders, and the seminars and data-driven metrics type of programs that you provide to the nonprofit community. Talk a little bit about how you've interacted with the public since COVID started.
Sure. So if you're not familiar with how Communities Foundation of Texas and community foundations in general operate, as Melissa said, we are this kind of hub for philanthropy. We kind of operate like a charitable bank. So individuals, families, companies set up accounts with us, which we call funds. You may have heard the term donor advised fund. We also manage scholarship funds and a whole host of other types of accounts. And then we help to facilitate giving. So you as an individual can tell us when you want to make grants from your fund to which organizations and in the amounts that you choose. So for us, when COVID struck, I mean, our immediate response is how do we start getting as much money out into the community as we possibly can, knowing that literally every nonprofit organization in North Texas and across this country was impacted. And that social service agencies and education organizations were seeing huge upticks in demand and didn't have necessarily the resources to support that demand. And then organizations like the arts organizations, which Terry's going to talk about, you know, having to cancel performances and fundraisers and the implications of that. So we did a couple of things. One, I think, is probably our best success out of all of this, and it's just an example of how relationships matter. We worked very closely with the Dallas Foundation, as well as United Way of Metropolitan Dallas, to stand up a common grant application where nonprofit organizations that were severely impacted by COVID could submit one application that was then reviewed by more than 30 foundations and funding partners across North Texas. So rather than having their grants team, spend a lot of time churning out grant applications and reaching out to to funders, their development staff reaching out to funders. This common grant application was then shared across all of these funders, and then the funders were having weekly phone calls to coordinate where we were making grants to make sure that we had all of the highest needs covered for our community. So that effort, called North Texas Cares, deployed about $40 million in a very short amount of time. The funders have come together for a 2.0 version of that, and the application period just closed last Friday. So we're looking forward to working with our funding partners and making another round of grants through that process. Of course, the other thing that we did very quickly was stand up a mini kind of emergency North Texas Giving Day. We did that again in partnership with United Way and also with the Dallas Cowboys. And so that raised about $20 million that, again, was immediately sent right back out to the participating nonprofits to help them close those gaps until some of their fundraising individually picked up and some of the government support was able to kick in. But in terms of convenings and events, obviously this has been a major shift for us. Our big space here on Caruth Haven Lane is pretty quiet. We're not hosting in-person convenings and events right now. We're doing everything virtually, but we look forward to hopefully getting back to in-person things in the very near future.
Thanks, Monica. Wow, and what successful giving days too. It's so incredible to think of the Dallas community, and we say it many, many times, how incredibly generous the community is, but it really, proof was in the pudding, having two in one year. Terry, I want to talk to you a little bit because you offer such a different perspective, and it's the arts, and some people may say it's not frontline. We're going to get into fundraising. You're right, a little bit later on. But in terms of program delivery for the arts organizations, how have you all been able to advise the arts groups and how to deliver and keep audiences engaged in the profound work that the arts community is doing here in Dallas?
That's a moving target. As everyone on the panel that's running a 501c3 or working in funding nonprofits can relate. So first there was the panic, obviously, of the impact of COVID, February, March, to where our initial response was, how do we continually support these organizations in our portfolio financially with this unknown trajectory of how long this was going to go. So to Jan's point, we have been given, all of us have been given information early on. Well, it's going to peak in Dallas at this point, and then it's going to get hot and it'll go away. Well, the ball kept moving further and further down the field, and here we are. So we did our normal AGO process, our normal funding cycle in March. Shortly after that, realized that funding was not going to be sustainable enough for the arts institution. So we created the Emergency Relief Fund. And to date, between April and June, we've probably distributed about $992,000 back into the cultural arts community here in North Texas, or in Dallas County specifically. Once that panic was over, most institutions, small, medium, and large, were faced with where we're going with your question, Melissa. We're faced with, what do we do? We just can't sit here and not do something. So all of us, this Zoom call today, I know that, everyone on this call, including our guests, are probably, rolling their eyes, yet another Zoom, panel discussion or a Zoom work call. So virtual content was the first thing out of the gate for organizations of all sizes. Even those who were probably reluctant to have a comprehensive virtual digital strategy in their marketing or distribution mix prior to COVID are now making sure that it is robust and relevant. So that was the first thing. So you saw, whether it's readings, plays, dance performances, the performing arts have been hit particularly hard because you can't put people on stage to sing. So the opera, the Dallas Symphony, now, and any performing arts organizations. So first and foremost, it was producing digital content, and we have been encouraging our portfolio of grantees to really get on their game when it comes to the creativity and method of which and by which they're doing that. So it's more than just setting up a Zoom call and saying we're going to produce a play. There's a lot of work that that goes into making that happen, and then monetizing it is also a big issue. So putting it up is one thing, making money on it when you've been hit and slammed with this quickly it is an ongoing challenge. Even for us, we're doing an event at the end of October that will be a streaming performance concert that we're diving into that boat as a funder to present this content streaming, and how we're going to be successful monetizing that. Now we're seeing the resumption of programming across the board, but being done very safe, in person. A lot of outdoor venues are being, Kit Summers and the folks at ATPAC here in the Arts District are probably being inundated because they have great space to do that, as well as we're seeing some usage around some of the Dallas parks. So, but the weather's going to start getting cooler. So you're doing some in-person performances. The Dallas Symphony, for example, went back with, I think, 40 to 45 musicians on the stage, social distance out, with an audience of no more than 75 people in the Meyerson. Bruce Wood Dance did a performance a few weeks ago in a parking lot with a theater company. So a lot of creativity is going into the delivery of content and programming, and that will continue until, I see that continuing even when there is a vaccine, because the execution of such a vaccine is not going to happen overnight. So the really interesting and dynamic thing I think that's really cool is COVID has forced artists of all types and art institutions to rethink programming content. So what we're anticipating seeing from individual artists and arts institutions are a lot of new work, visual art, dance, music, theater, the whole 9 yards, around what's going on in our society right now. So it's not just, oh, we need to put on, does the Dallas Opera come back in January with a production of Swan Lake, as opposed to, hey, we have a new piece that's been written that speaks to, the effects of COVID and education, which is something that a lot of us don't think about, especially those of us who don't have kids, how COVID has impacted the educational quality of kids across the U.S. So long way around answering the question. We're encouraging all of our grantees to be very dynamic, very creative, as long as they're doing so with a safety protocol that protects artists and the public. Nothing's off the table from a review process. So.
Thanks, Terry. I think you're right. There's a lot we don't think about in terms of the production and how to bring things forward. And I love your point about being relevant, because I think that's engaging and important to an audience member. But also your point about how do we monetize? And that's going to lead me to my next question. And Jan, I'm going to start with you this time. And you've hosted now a virtual event. You announced your capital campaign and sort of the end of the capital campaign, which seems so dramatic during these times that we know so many nonprofits are struggling. I would love for each of you to just address, how are we monetizing? How are we addressing the shortfall? Or maybe we're having our best year ever for each one of your organizations.
Okay, so I'll jump in, and I want to say a couple of things. First, the people of this community have been so incredibly generous. I think people in this community believe in our mission. And I find that during the hardest of times, people's generosity still goes to critical human need, and we certainly fall into that. as does obviously feeding the hungry. Has this been our best year? Yes and no. So as you alluded to, we were in, I mean, imagine doing operations and a capital campaign in this time, but we were on the sort of downhill slide on the largest capital campaign I've certainly ever done. And what we found was that foundations that we were like sort of waiting on, okay, we should hear from them, by the 1st, or we should hear from them by the 15th, which is, we're just holding our breath, came back with we are not considering capital gifts at this time. Now, some of those did pivot and benefit us with a special COVID gift. So that was super, super helpful. So in one way it helped and one way it didn't help. I think one of what really saved us was we scrambled, and I literally mean scrambled, to get PPP money, the personnel protection. What is the other P? I don't know what it's for, but it literally saved us. It was hard to get for us because of just banking snafus, but finally came in at the second round of funds and were able to get that, which was just absolutely incredible. Luckily we were able to receive special gifts, but I want to go back to our experience with the Giving Tuesday Now. I mean, this was money in, was it April or March or April, Monica?
It was actually the first part of May,
It was first part of May. Okay, we were ramping up in April for that. And it was, on our part of it, it's so competitive, guys, that we have to literally have a cute video and have everybody's asking for the same money. So we're all dancing around trying to get it. And I mean, we came in so blessed. It was $155,000. I mean, this was money that would not have happened when we needed it the most, before other things had kicked in. We just really felt so lucky. But we also were worried that, okay, we really count on Giving Tuesday, and we were afraid that on Giving Day, and we were afraid that maybe that size of a blessing would have hurt us in September. But to be honest, we had a 7% increase with 626 donors, $173,000 on Giving Day. And so that is money that, there are no strings attached to it. We can absolutely begin using that as operational dollars. So it's just been, I feel like, fundraising, well, everything, programmatically and financially. I've been playing a big old game of whack-a-mole, Just one thing does well, and then the other was like, darn, when can we go back to them for the capital gift? But we're doing the best we can with what we have. But we've really, truly been blessed during this time.
Thanks, Jan. I love the whack-a-mole. I'm just picturing you with a hammer out there. That makes sense.
I am. I am. Yeah, yeah.
Monica, how about you? And in the creations, because you distribute money as well as you're asking for money at the same time, and the conversations that you're having with stakeholders, as well as community organizations, are somewhat different. So walk us through your fundraising cycle and how this has all affected you.
Yeah, so for our fundraising team, which is working closely with donors to put more money into their funds with us, we were very fortunate because we actually closed calendar 2019 with our best year ever. And I mean, partly that's because I have a fabulous team, but it's also because the market was very high. And we know historically that when the stock market is strong, it really impacts the size and the timing of charitable gifts. And so we had lots of fund holders who had just put money into their funds at the end of calendar 2019, which was actually a good thing because that meant they had money available then to grant out when COVID struck, and knowing that the nonprofits really needed that support. So just a couple of data points. From January through the beginning of September in 2019, our donor advised funds, we have about 750 donor advised funds. They granted about $12 million from those funds during that period. This year, in 2020, during the same period from January through the beginning of September, our donor advised funds granted $26 million. So more than double what the grant making activity that they had done in the previous year, which is great. I mean, part of that is our staff communicating what the needs are that are emerging during this crisis, giving to the organizations that they've always given to and cared so much about, but recognizing that there was this funding fall while there was also a huge demand for services. And I also just want to make a couple of quick comments about Giving Day. So as Jan mentioned, we did the special North Texas Giving Tuesday now, early in the spring. And then of course, our regular Giving Day, which just happened on September 17th. We honestly were stunned by the generosity of this community. We always have ambitious goals and of course want to exceed the previous year. Last year, we raised $50 million in that 18-hour period online. And this year, quite frankly, we were a bit nervous. People had just given in the spring. We knew they had been giving all along. Were they tapped out? And would they continue to give? And, the totals for this year, almost $59 million given in 18 hours from over 106,000 unique donors to 3,200 nonprofits. I mean, it's quite stunning. And I think it, again, just speaks to the generosity of our community. It is extraordinary. And, we find it when we go and visit other communities and other community foundations. I mean, there's just something very special about North Texas. So for everybody that participated in Giving Day, a big, big thank you. It really does make a big difference to those nonprofits.
And I find it interesting too, Monica, we were talking about how many first-time donors there are through North Texas Giving Day, first-time donors for the first time to an organization. So they're obviously being inspired by the day and the information that you all are providing about the needs in the community and specific charities to be able to invest in.
Yeah, I think people don't realize that. They often think that it's, your existing donor base that's giving to your organization. And certainly your supporters are often generously giving on North Texas Giving Day. But we find typically somewhere between 25 and 30% of donors are first-time donors to organizations that they have given to. So that's a huge opportunity for now nonprofits to steward those relationships and continue to hopefully retain them well into the future. But yeah, we're thrilled by that statistic, which has been pretty consistent through the entire 12-year run of North Texas Giving Day.
Well, speaking of new donors, Tricia, I imagine that North Texas Food Bank is seeing an insurgence of new donors. Talk to us a little bit about fundraising and how it's going for you all.
So first, again, thank you to our North Texas community. I think Jan and Monica have expressed it very well. I mean, we've always believed in our North Texas community and they've believed in us. I think for the first time, we saw ourselves on the front line of this pandemic, trying to meet these most basic needs of our community. And, we have a wonderful partner network of which Jan is a part of as well. And they're trying to make sure that their clients have what they need. But we literally doubled our food output overnight. And what that meant was increased cost. So as the supply chain, as you know, at the grocery store, a lot of prices have gone up too during this time period. Well, they did for us as well. And we typically relied a lot on donated food to help us to get things out to the community. But when we are kitting a box, not only do you have the expense of the actual physical box, it also requires additional capacity to store those boxes. So we had to go and secure additional sites to even store, even though we have this wonderful new facility, it wasn't big enough for boxed food and the production that we needed to be able to have done. And then inside the box, we wanted to make sure it was nutritionally balanced. So it required specific types of food to be able to go in the box. So we couldn't just take food that was coming in and put it in a box. We were literally building 50 to 60,000 boxes per day. And we still are. I mean, that's still our capacity. We are still seeing very high needs across the community. And so we had some initial donors step up early on to help us with some of the initial expenses that we were having. These giving days, oh my goodness, we were blown away by people that wanted to help. I mean, we have stories of people sending their stimulus checks to us because they were even living on a fixed income, but they said, we know that there are greater needs in the community and we want to be able to help. We had people that were receiving food in line. I had my colleague at American Red Cross, which we activated the Mass Care Task Force for this pandemic, which Communities Foundation is the holder of that fund. But he was telling me that they had people come and donate blood because they had received food at the food bank to be able to do something to be able to give back. So that just shows the heart of our community. And I can tell you one thing that I've always told people is through this pandemic, one of the things that doesn't surprise me, but it's also reassuring, is just our faith in humanity. You know, whenever there is a need, our community wants to meet the need. They don't want people to suffer, no matter what it might be, and they want to be able to help. So our needs have gone up substantially. Our costs have gone up substantially, but our community has stepped in to try to make sure that we're meeting those. And we do have a lot of first-time donors, and we're trying to make sure that we're letting them know what they're able to impact because of their contributions. Just to give you an idea of what it's cost, the value from what we have put into the community just from mid-March through the end of June. I don't have it through September yet. We're working on that now. But that was about $25 million that it cost for the acquisition and distribution of food during that time period. And so it's expensive to be able to do this, but so all these contributions that we're getting in, we're also thinking about the long-term needs. Because even when we get a vaccine, we know that it's not immediately going to be back to normal. As businesses are shutting down, the economic impact of those businesses closing their doors, it's going to be many months. And we've worked with consultants to try to help us, to try to give us an idea of how long we're going to see this increased need. And their best guesstimate is anywhere from 18 to 24 months. And so we're having to figure out how can we sustain our operations for the long term with the contributions that we've received. So extremely grateful and thankful for the community. We recently just ran into a situation, even with the Get Shift Done initiative, where we were not going to have access to some of those workers. And we had another foundation step up to be able to fund them for an additional period of time so that we could make sure that we could continue with the output level that we need to be able to serve our community at least through the end of the year.
Tricia, the stories are profound, but I love the full circle of some of the stories that you've shared, and the giving back from those that have been given to certainly is inspiring, and the sheer magnitude is overwhelming to really wrap one's head around the sheer need that's out there in the community.
Yeah, it was those nuggets that just kept us going, you know, just to know that there was that support, and the appreciation and the gratefulness that you saw was just amazing.
Yeah, you saw it in some of the pictures that were in the Dallas Morning News or on your website of just the sheer gratefulness and in the eyes of those that truly are in need, and in need for the first time. So it's so very humbling. Terry, I saved you for the last because I know that down in the Arts District, you are doing a yeoman's job in pumping the blood that we need as a city to keep our arts community alive. Talk to us a little bit about how it's going and what your plans are to continue to sustain those groups that are such a vital part of our Dallas heritage.
You know, it's interesting. Tricia brought something up around, you know, what they have been seeing and doing to help feed, you know, citizens of Dallas and North Texas. And it reminded me of something that, a conversation that I had early on. You know, I'm about to celebrate my first year with TACA. And I joked with my board that, you know, they didn't disclose the pandemic on the horizon before I took the job. So, but the arts, and Melissa, you kind of alluded to this when we started. So the arts are not always considered in situations like this essential. And I was getting a lot of that, not from donors, but just from folks that I knew in the community. You know, why should I give money to TACA to help support an arts organization as opposed to a social services 501c3? And my response was typically, you should do both. You know, Tricia's point about the generosity of the community here in North Texas, you know, we are this oddity when it comes to giving compared to other metropolitan areas. And it's always been that way. But I brought up something very key that I think is important for people to understand. And that is whether you're feeding someone because they don't have access to food, or you're feeding someone culturally because of mental health issues that can arise because there's no social engagement because of this pandemic. Each of these institutions, those that are in the Arts District and those all over Dallas County that are in the cultural arts, are made up of people. So when someone would say to me, you know, why does the opera, why does the symphony, why does a theater company need funds right now? It's because those institutions employ people. Those people have families to support, children to either try and keep in school, or, you know, have to stay home themselves to learn how to do online classes on Zoom with their kids. So this is a rolling effect. So the generosity that we have all seen in North Texas has been overwhelming. So I think it's very important for people to understand that when it comes to the arts, we're not just funding a facility. We're not just funding the musicians who play in the Dallas Opera, the resident acting company at the Dallas Theater Center. Even those people have families. So it's top down. It may be the CEO of an institution down to the folks in the box office who are taking tickets, to the people that are coming in cleaning these spaces when we leave them. So when you think of the sheer number of people going in and out of these organizations and facilities pre-COVID, and what it's going to take moving forward to make sure that the public patrons, the public and performers and the purveyors of the arts are safe, it's enormous. So we've done 2 surveys since COVID started, just in the cultural arts in Dallas, in North Texas. And there's been a $67 million revenue hit to just nonprofits in the cultural arts. So if I were to add in all of the nonprofit sector in North Texas, I can't imagine what that number would be. So if you think of the fact that we've taken a $67 million hit, and that doubled over the course of about 38 days, by the way. When we did the first survey, we were at about 31, 32 million. And then about 40, probably 8 weeks later, it had doubled. So that's furloughs. And the other thing that happened, of course, was the PPP funds that the federal government put in place. So once those funds were exhausted, you really start to see the rubber hit the road around layoffs, furloughs, things like that. So once we exhausted our emergency relief fund, we moved and shifted gears to say, okay, organizations have to move forward with some sort of programming. So we were created what we call the TACA Resiliency Initiative, which we launched a little over a month ago, which is designed to do a couple of things. One, we knew that we couldn't wait until our next funding cycle, which technically wouldn't have been until next June. Organizations needed funds now. So we implemented the Resiliency Initiative, which awards through a grant application, which provides funding to arts organizations that are moving forward to the best of their ability with their programming and content. A lot of that is new. So we discontinued our New Works program, our Artist in Residency program, and our normal arts operating grants initiatives, because we needed to provide funds quickly, and we needed to provide unrestricted funds. So even dollars that were sitting in our coffers that were restricted based on various programming to grantees, we lifted those funds and said, hey, we'll get back to that at some point, take those funds and use them as you see fit. So the Resiliency Initiative is set up the same way, only we're doing 3 grant distributions. So the first one will be this month, the next one will be in the spring, and then one in the summer. So we are still moving forward with that funding, but we've lifted some of the restrictions, a lot of the restrictions. The application process is a lot more streamlined, so not as many hurdles to jump, but you still have to jump through a few because we still need valuable information, you know, about staffing, finances, what have you. But it's designed to encourage safely for organizations to resume some sort of programming and delivery of content in the arts, and reward them for doing so with that funding. So we went from emergency to together, how do we define what organizations are going to be able to do without knowing when and if there's going to be an end date. So I would love to go back to resuming large-scale programs in person. But to Jan's point, we don't know when, even with a vaccine, when that's going to happen. So it's a I tell people now when they say, how are you doing? I say, I'm running like I have a target on my back, and I do, but all of us are doing that are in the nonprofit sector, whether it's the arts or social services, because from a funding perspective, that changes. We've also done something that I think is very crucial, which is to start a marketing initiative to encourage philanthropic giving from a younger professional demographic. So we have a new marketing initiative that's starting later this month to where we're targeting large institutions, whether they be, Ernst & Young, PwC, some large scale companies, to say you have employee network groups within these organizations and a vast number of employees who may not be engaged in the nonprofit community. So how do we engage them in a giving initiative at levels they can afford? So all of the folks who fund all of our organizations from a donor perspective, let's say from a large scale, start it somewhere. So my take on that is, how do we instill the value of philanthropic giving now, whether that's someone working, at a bank that can do $25 or, a one-time gift or $25 a month. It has to start somewhere, and we start cultivating and building a new generation of philanthropic support to not just me, but all of the nonprofits across North Texas.
Thanks, Terry. I think that's a great point, and something that I'm sure a lot of our viewers today would be very interested in, those that sit on boards, those that are fundraisers themselves. It shows innovation right through this whole process, how we've all had to adjust and pivot. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here as we start to close out this incredible discussion, and so appreciative of all of your insights. And Monica, I'm going to start with you and ask you all, has there been an aha moment? Was there a pivotal kind of learning moment for you throughout this process? And then while we have the lion's share of our viewers on, please let us know. I think we had someone in the chat say, how can we, as the Junior League of Dallas, sustainers, donors, volunteers, how can we help your particular organization?
Sure. Well, for me, the aha moment was just how much relationships matter, and all the relationships. I mean, so many good friends on this panel, for example, because we already had these really strong bonds, we could mobilize things very quickly because we already had trust and knew each other's operations and, understood the basics we had built over all of these years. And so mobilizing very quickly in a crisis like that, I think, is really dependent on strong relationships. And I do worry about, in our virtual world, that we're still running on relationship equity that we've all built over the years from being together in person, running into people serendipitously at the valet lines, which I miss and never thought I would miss. But I think, that's the really key aha moment. I mean, whether it's other foundations that we've partnered with, whether it's nonprofits and understanding, like with Tricia, how can we mobilize volunteers? Because you can't operate if you don't have volunteers. Things like that, making grants to support the arts organizations, understanding just the implications of that with Terry's group. So that's been the aha for me. And I would say in terms of how people can continue to support CFT, it's really continuing to spread the word that nonprofits need our help, and everybody needs to dig a little bit deeper and recognize that this is not going to be a quick fix. Even when a vaccine has been found, as many people have mentioned, this is going to be ongoing. Even after the threat of the virus has passed, the implications and economic ramifications of this will be felt for many, many, many years. So continuing to encourage people to give as they can. I saw a really encouraging statistic today in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, which is one of our industry publications, that giving is up 7.5% for the first half of 2020. And they attribute a big portion of that to people giving less than $250. So these are people that, don't have millions. You don't have to be a millionaire or billionaire to be a philanthropist, but I think everybody can do something.
Yeah, thank you. That's great, Monica. Terry, how about you? Let's jump back and close with Jan and Tricia. The question is, Terry, to you, aha moment. And then also, what can the audience today do to help out Taka?
I think an aha moment for me was the outpouring of generosity. I think all of us that are in, you know, I'd hate to say just nonprofit, for-profit organizations as well. Once everyone realized the economic impact that the pandemic was going to have across the board, you know, panic obviously and naturally ensued. So to see donations come in by our participation in North Texas Giving Day, for example, to see colleagues and friends of mine from around the country who don't even live in Dallas that would see what we were doing and would go to our website and send us, you know, $20, $50. That degree of care and concern was an aha moment for me, because we were all in this mode of, you know, how I have to survive, Taka has to survive to continually do what we do and support the arts while maintaining our own sustainability as well. So, you know, you've got it on both sides. How do we continually support the cultural arts while making sure that me and my staff are here to continually do the work? And then as far as helping and where people are, I echo what Monica said. I think everyone is capable of digging deep at levels that are comfortable for them. There is no, during this time, there is no amount of money that cannot be used. So whether that's someone who's able to send one of our organizations $5 or $5,000, the need is great. And that need is great because of what we do with those funds. So all of us that are on the panel today and many people who are participating on the call today, I go back to my earlier point. All of us are in the business of helping people. It's just in different ways. But at the end of the day, there's a face, a soul, an energy that is attached to a family unit of some sort. That's why we do this. So by doing that, we're still, as it relates to Taka, I feel that I'm assisting these organizations in the cultivation of what they do and producing great art. So if we are feeding and sustaining the needs of people, then we can get through this. But it's going to take a combined effort, a lot of collaboration, which Monica also alluded to. I've stopped using the word pivot because that's the COVID word for the year. And I've moved to collaboration because that's